Hello, everybody, and welcome to Throwback Thursday. Now, we talked on Tuesday about some horror movies that are being rebooted, and it got me to thinking. On our Throwback Thursday, we talk about older movies that you should really see. We try to bring in some news when needed, but I'm taking us back to kind of a more simpler way of doing it where we just talk about movies you should really see, some older movies you may not have seen on Throwback Thursday. And when we have to do news about it, we will. But that brings us to this video. I got to thinking about what are some of the remakes that are actually better than the original. So I picked our top 5 remakes that I believe are actually better than the original. So let's jump right into it. Alright, so here are my top 5 picks for remakes that are actually better than the originals. Now, first up, we have Man on Fire 2004, which is actually a remake of a movie that came out in 1997, Man on Fire, which was still based on the book. And instead of having Denzel, it had Scott Glenn playing the role of Crazies. Now, if you don't know what the movie's about, it's about this ex-soldier who kind of starts to become a protector to this little girl. He's hired as a bodyguard, and when something happens to the little girl, he goes on a rampage to try to get revenge. The movie is excellent, and both movies are pretty good. The Scott Glenn one does deliver, but the Denzel one has a certain kind of charm. And that certain kind of charm that the Denzel one has overshadows the original movie that came out. And honestly makes you forget that it even existed. Alright, so the next movie is The Crazies. 2010. Now, The Crazies 2010 is a remake of the 1973 version. And in this movie, the government has this biological weapon that goes off, and they seize this town because of it. And the stuff that happens after they seize the town is what really becomes the basis for this movie. Bringing it into a more modern setting worked well for the movie, and it does have a lot better effects when needed. And the dialogue in the movie is argumentatively better. You have a bigger group of actors that are playing in the movie. And all of this kind of goes hand in hand in making a lot of people forget that the original actually existed. However, here's the thing about this one. It's a bit odd because The Crazies isn't a film you hear people talk about on the regular. And maybe they should be talking about it. It's actually an okay movie, and both versions are very good. Just putting that in a more modern setting actually makes that one a little bit better. It makes it so that the film resonates a little more. Taking it out of the 70s, which that worked for it as well. However, it's just the whole thing that you would have to watch and decide which version you actually like the best. For me, the more modern setting is a little bit scarier to watch. And the effects in it are a bit more when they need to be. And everything just kind of chimes with this movie. So that's our second pick. Alright, so our next movie is The Fly 1986. It's a David Cronenberg movie, and it takes an old Vincent Price movie that is a classic within its own right and modernizes it, making it a lot more gory in a way that only David Cronenberg could do. He has this way of bringing you this really gross out, terrifying vibe, and it works well for this movie. In fact, the movie doesn't seem like the original at all, except in premise only. So I honestly say you could watch both of them and kind of make your own canon if you needed to. But the more modern film is the better one in terms of keeping you on your toes a little bit more. Jeff Goldblum is absolutely amazing as the title character, and it showcases just how bringing the movie into the modern era can ultimately change up how people think of the original, because the original, while liked, isn't really talked about nearly as much as it deserves. Granted, it is still a classic and people still deem it to be such, but The Fly 1986 spawned its own sequel, much like the original did, where it continues the story that happens in this movie. And these movies are considered by a lot of gorehounds to be utter classics. Next up is John Carpenter's The Thing. Now, John Carpenter's The Thing is actually a remake to The Thing from Another World. And that movie sort of also, in a roundabout way, serves as a prequel to John Carpenter's The Thing. John Carpenter took inspiration from that movie to sort of remake that entire universe, to sort of remake what he liked about that movie growing up. John Carpenter was a fan of the original, and his being a fan of the original and also being able to use a lot of FX and a lot of stuff to make this creature really terrifying is what makes this movie better than the original. Because watching the original, it's not that the movie doesn't have little minor moments that are a little bit terrifying, but it never really delivers on the absolute utter terrifying points that this sequel actually brings you. Now, the next one is the biggest one. The one that people oftentimes forget is even a remake because it overshadows the original so much that you really don't ever hear anybody refer to the original at all. And that is Scarface 1983. It is actually a remake of Howard Hawks' 1932 film, and it changes a lot about the film, but in a way that makes it again more modern. A lot of times remakes are done just to make them more modern, but in this case, the reimagining of Scarface as a modern day mobster changes a lot of things about the movie in a really great way. It is one of the most quoted movies that you will ever hear. How many times have you heard somebody say hello to my little friend? And numerous other lines from this movie get mentioned. The Ghetto Boys wrote an entire song with lines from this movie. Everything about this movie resonates within pop culture. It is one of those films that you can't think of Scarface without thinking of Al Pacino. And that is something to be said. They could remake that movie today and everybody would still imagine Al Pacino's version as the only and definitive version out there. No matter who you cast, he is the definitive version of Scarface and always will be. All right, so I want to know if you agree with my choices. Are there any other remakes and reboots that you think are better than the originals? We want to hear from you in the comments down below. And don't forget to share this video with all of your friends so they can be a part of the conversation as well. And then, friends, don't forget to hit that like button because it's free and it helps the channel. And we appreciate it a lot. Then, Miko says we need more subscribers. You don't want to disappoint Miko. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And while you're down there, hit that notification bell as well so you don't miss a single video we do. Then, friends, at the end of the day, I know it, you know it, and you can bet Miko knows it. Fandom is family.